Live from the Star Plaza Theater in Merrillville, Indiana, the Indiana Debate Commission presents the first of 3 debates in the race for Governor of Indiana.
Hello, my name is Dan Lowry. I'm the Vice President of Academic Affairs at Calumet College of St. Joseph and the host of Lakeshore Focus, a public affairs program produced by Lakeshore Public Television. On behalf of the Indiana Debate Commission, welcome to the Star Plaza Theater in Merrillville for the first of 3 gubernatorial debates to be conducted during the fall campaign season. Our 3 participants are Republican Party candidate Mitch Daniels, Democratic Party candidate Jill Long Thompson, and Libertarian Party candidate Andy Horning. Mitch Daniels was elected governor of the state of Indiana in 2004 and assumed office in January 2005. He previously served as president of Eli Lilly and Company and as director of the Office of Management and Budget under President George W. Bush. Jill Long Thompson represented Indiana's 4th congressional district in the U.S. House of Representatives from 1989 to 1995. She served as an Undersecretary of Agriculture in the Clinton administration as well. Andy Horning has worked in product development, clinical engineering, and project management. He served as a newspaper columnist and as a public speaker as well. All of the questions to be asked this evening were submitted by Hoosier voters. The final set of questions was selected by the Indiana Debate Commission. The order of questioning was determined by chance and will rotate from candidate to candidate as we proceed. Each candidate will be provided with 90 seconds to respond to each question. After an initial round of responses, each candidate will be provided with an additional 45 seconds for rebuttal purposes. Our first question, and it's directed to Mr. Daniels. Dwayne Runnels, a retiree who lives in Indianapolis, asks, what do you expect to be the most important issue during the next 4 years, and how do you intend to address it?
Thanks to the Commission. Thanks to Dwayne for a great opening question. I would say that the pressing question before Hoosiers in every year foreseeable is the state of our economy and how we continue to assure our kids a better standard of living than we enjoyed. I think over the next 4 years, I would center on 2 issues on which I don't believe we've made nearly sufficient progress. I could list a large number of other areas in which Indiana is now routinely seen as the star of the Midwest and in the top tier nationally. But it's not true about education, and it's not true yet about health care costs. On the education front, we need to be strengthened from top to bottom, but among other things, I've proposed bringing more dollars and discipline into the classrooms of this state, dollars that come principally from more efficient spending. We've increased education spending every year the last 4, but there's a huge opportunity beyond when we notice that only 61 cents the education dollar actually makes it to the classroom. More discipline in our classrooms, assuring Indiana high school grads that they can go to college and that we will see to it. And on the health care front, continuing to broaden health insurance coverage and finding ways to make certain that this cost comes down to the level of taxes, utilities, and the cost of government, where right now Indiana is the most competitive state anywhere near us.
Ms. Long Thompson.
Since we're in Northwest Indiana, I would like to make a statement about the flood this weekend. I happened to be here on Sunday during the flooding and have talked with a number of officials over the last couple of days and want to commend emergency workers and citizens who really rose to the occasion these last several days, and also make it clear that those of you who lost family and friends, that my husband and me, our hearts go out to you. Regarding the question, I believe the #1 issue facing the state of Indiana is our economy. And Governor Daniels would have you believe that everything is going pretty well here in Indiana and that we are somehow doing better than our neighboring states. Well, he needs a reality check. In fact, we are losing jobs faster than any other state in the United States. We're losing jobs faster than Illinois, than Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky. Hoosiers make about 88 cents on the dollar relative to the rest of the country. I have served as Undersecretary for Rural Development at the Department of Agriculture, where I've created thousands of jobs. I have put forth a plan that has received recognition from leading newspapers around the state. My plan will create good-paying jobs, and my plan will also make health insurance affordable, and it will help us to increase our high school graduation rate. I think the choice is pretty clear: 4 more years of job loss and income loss, or new leadership that brings the kind of change that Indiana needs for creating jobs well into the future.
Thank you. And Mr. Horning, the most important issue of the next 4 years.
Well, actually, it's the most important issue that faces any nation at any time, and that is, who are you and what are you all about, whether you trust politicians or whether you believe in freedom. And I think this nation proved more than any other that freedom actually works, and that the corollary to "in God we trust" is that in politicians we do not. And I'm afraid that what we have done is kind of, we've entrusted politicians with everything. And I suppose the big issue is, do we want to continue in that direction? Do we want to put more and more power into political hands and in their funding mechanisms and in the lobbyists and lawyers and all of the things we say we hate about politics? Or do we want to be free people where we're more self-reliant and where we keep our politicians on a leash? I'm here for really one reason, and that's to put the Constitution of Indiana and the United States of America on the ballot. And you can choose whether you want the constitutions as written, and that's as they were intended, you know, no debating the meaning of the word "is," or whether we want to keep doing what we've been doing. And we know the history of that is not very good. When you put politicians in ever more power into fewer and fewer hands, the result has never been good. So basically, I'm here just for one thing: put a leash on politicians and let you be free.
Thank you. In our second question, we're going to begin with Ms. Long Thompson. Arlene Nunez, a state employee from East Chicago, is concerned about...
Excuse me, do we have a rebuttal for each
I apologize.
question?
You are correct. I was jumping ahead of myself there. Let's begin with Mr. Daniels, and we have 45 seconds for the rebuttal. Thank you. Okay.
Well, let's agree that our economy isn't nearly what we want it to be. In the last 3 months, we've suffered a real, very specific hit in the RV industry, thanks to $5 diesel and credit markets that seized up. But CNBC named us the most improved economy in the country for a reason. We've been #1 in everybody's ranking among Midwest states. We have added jobs, not lost jobs over the last few years. And we do have the lowest unemployment in the Midwest. Those are matters of simple fact. Ms. Thompson's plan, we'd like to look at all new ideas, and I looked at this one. It's been described actually by the newspapers of the state as vague, and for good reason. It's expensive, it amounts to corporate welfare, and it favors, strangely enough, the parts of the state that are doing very, very well right now.
Thank you. 45 seconds, Ms. Long Thompson.
Well, I think that the fact that we've lost 60,000 jobs just since last summer, and the #1 question Hoosiers have when they log on to the state's website is how do they access unemployment insurance. And maybe if Governor Daniels were not spending so much time flying around in the state airplane at taxpayer expense, flying back from his vacation home in West Virginia, he'd have a better sense of how difficult it is for many Hoosier families. My plan is a good plan. It doesn't cost taxpayers anything, but it will create good-paying jobs.
Mr. Horning.
I think maybe you better put my podium in between these two. Actually, politicians will differ on things, and that's fine. That's what we want. But I guess what I want to make sure that happens is that when politicians differ about your life, it doesn't really matter that much, that we should be more self-directed, and we should trust less in politicians and their constant bickering.
Our second question then, and Ms. Long Thompson. Arlene Nunez, a state employee from East Chicago, is concerned about privatization. She notes that during Governor Daniels' time in office, several state services have been privatized. Ms. Nunez asks, what efforts will you take to continue or to stop these actions?
Well, interestingly, when Governor Daniels was running for office 4 years ago, he said that he wouldn't privatize, and if there was any contracting to be done in the private sector, that the contracts would go to state businesses. but nothing could be further from the truth in how he's actually conducted business. I believe the privatization of the toll road was a major mistake. I also believe the privatization of the prison at Newcastle was a mistake characterized by the riot that occurred. And we know that privatizing our FSSA programs has been disastrous. Not only has it hurt families in need, but it's not saving the state any money. I have a long history of knowing how to address problems. I'm very fortunate. I have an MBA and a PhD in business from Indiana University. And at my time at the United States Department of Agriculture, I had a particular program that wasn't working very well, and I had a choice between privatizing it or fixing it. I chose to fix it. And if I am honored to serve our great state as governor, I will fix the privatization problems that have been created by Governor Daniels, and I will certainly stop the rampant privatization that has been a major characteristic of his time as governor.
Mr. Horning.
Privatization has been a misused term in my way of looking at this, and that we should really decide whether government has a business doing something or not. And generally speaking, I look at government as the sword of state. It's an armed force. It inherently does things with violence, and we have to be careful how we unleash that. I am all for getting rid of things completely out of government that don't belong there. But to have some sort of hybridized look at this, where it's kind of government and it's kind of not, that really makes no sense to me. And we should really decide what things we should keep in government's purview, where it is necessary to use the jails and police officers and so on, the inherent violence of government, or whether we turn it over completely to the free market, where all transactions are voluntary and where nobody's forced to do anything. I believe very strongly, in fact, that one of the key problems that's facing us right now is that we can't decide what our government is and what it is not. And I'm very insistent on the idea that government is a very dangerous tool. It's kind of like a junkyard dog. You want to keep it in the junkyard. So when we privatize something, in my way of looking at it, that means hands off. We're out of the business and we leave it to the experts.
Mr. Daniels, privatization.
You're either for taxpayers or you're not. We view every service of government from a very practical standpoint. What's the best way to deliver it? What's the lowest cost to taxpayers? So when we believe, as in the case of the state police or gaming enforcement or the protection of children, that growing the workforce of government is the correct way to approach it, we have done that. But in other cases where we find that we can deliver equal or better service at lower cost to taxpayers, we do that. Prison food, prison health care, copying and printing, custodial services, all these available in the yellow pages. We have saved tens of millions of dollars for taxpayers by contracting for them with Hoosiers. And this has been one of the ways we balance the budget, which we found, of course, in condition of total bankruptcy. Couldn't have done it without these reforms. So it leads to the question, why would you be so ideologically committed to big government that you would overcharge taxpayers just for the sake of having larger government? I don't understand that viewpoint. We prefer to take a much more practical approach. Incidentally, we also found a state government sending 38 cents of every dollar out of state. I don't know why. I don't think it was intentional. I think people simply weren't keeping track. We do. We've pushed it up to 86%. That means billions of dollars staying in Hoosier firms. Lastly, we do this to protect taxpayers, but if a side effect is that the private sector, which pays the bills for government, gets a little bigger, and Indiana state government gets a little smaller, that's just fine with me, and I don't understand those who would disagree.
Ms. Long Thompson, 45-second rebuttal.
Well, a major problem with privatization, and particularly the privatization contracts that Governor Daniels has gotten the state into, is that it is a short-term gain for long-term pain. In other words, we get some money up front, but in the long term, it's going to cost us. The toll road is a classic example because not only have the tolls now more than doubled on the toll road, but the foreign consortium that has control of the toll road will have their investment recouped in 15 to 20 years. That means for 55 to 60 years, money that should be coming into Indiana for our infrastructure will be going outside, not just Indiana, but outside the United States. And that's why I have said as governor, I am going to look at every privatization contract he's entered us into and take us in the right direction.
Thank you. Mr. Horning? Please, we're cutting into the candidate's time to respond to questions. Mr. Horning, your rebuttal?
It's not much of a rebuttal. It's just more of an assertion that, once again, where we see politicians saying they know best, what they're doing is saying that all of the people out in the private sector do not. And I just don't believe that. I believe that the expertise in America that built this nation before we had anything like income tax or the first federal program is still out there. I think we still have the engineers and doctors to do what's necessary. And all we need to do is just decide, are we going to be a nation where we have a focused government that's there to protect us? Or are we going to ask for a government that has done something that's never worked very well, and that is to provide all the services that used to be done by Kiwanis and churches and voluntary associations and businessmen? I say turn it over. I say do the things the government has to do and do it in a very responsible fashion and turn everything over to the experts.
Thank you. Our third question, and we're going to begin with you, Mr. Horning. It comes from Dave Coriati. He's a retired business owner from Indianapolis. He asks, how do you propose to reverse the steady departure of manufacturing jobs from the state?
Well, this is something that actually hits me personally. My medical sector is one where taxation, regulation, litigation forced most of the businesses overseas. Now, that's not the case with everything. Electronics used to be a big deal in Indiana, and we've lost a lot of those, not necessarily to foreign countries where they have less regulation and obviously less litigation, but we've actually lost a lot of those to other Rust Belt states. The thing that we've done more than anything else is to allow politicians to decide what's best for us. And that's to choose things like professional sports and gambling, as opposed to allowing people to keep their money and make their own decisions. I think that it's frustrating that a nation that was built, in fact, let's just look at Indiana. We had Duesenberg, Studebaker, we had huge electronics companies that have been leaving by the boatload. And the problem has been that we've been waving them goodbye instead of begging them to stay. We've been asking all other sorts of businesses to come here, foreign auto manufacturers, and we pay them very handsomely for each of the jobs that they say they'll bring. But it's not working. It is just not working. This phony nonsense that politicians actually create jobs has got to be dispelled. You guys create jobs. People create jobs. Businessmen create jobs. Politicians get in the way, and I'm about getting them out of the way.
Mr. Daniels?
Well, there's much to agree with in what Andrew just said. I've said it 1,000 times myself. Government does not create jobs. Men and women of enterprise do, and government at its best creates the conditions whereby they do that well, make wealth for each other. So we've reformed the tax laws of this state, lowered taxes on businesses that export from here, lowered taxes on R&D, notably lowered property taxes, reformed regulation, our litigation system, and that's why we have the lowest unemployment in the Midwest. That's why we've set records for job attraction 4 consecutive years. That's why we are rated now over and over again by everyone who looks at this as the most attractive state basically outside the Sun Belt. Now that job's not even close to being done yet. And we must work every day to build the kind of climate of opportunity where the investment that Andrew just talked about will naturally happen. He's quite correct. We compete for incentives, and we've had a very successful record of winning jobs that are looking at more than one state. But that's the last piece of the puzzle, and the most important thing we do always, and we've been doing it successfully, is make of Indiana a magnet for new jobs and investment. Government bailouts are a bad idea, and if government tries, as some of our neighboring states have, desperately to protect jobs that are no longer competitive, it makes a big mistake, punishes taxpayers, and forfeits its opportunity to do what really matters, and that's what Indiana is doing in a superior fashion, creating a climate of opportunity. That's the right way to do it for the long term.
Ms. Long-Thompson, the loss of manufacturing jobs.
Well, again, Governor Daniels is misrepresenting what is really happening here in Indiana, and as I stated earlier, we've lost over 60,000 jobs here in Indiana just since last year. And I think probably the problem with his approach to economic development is it doesn't really create an economic climate that sets us apart from other states. And that's the kind of policy we need. That's why I am proposing 2 things. First, as governor, if I'm honored to serve as governor, I will be a leader on among governors on ensuring that any future trade agreements work for us. I know what it's like when a family member loses a job because it gets shipped overseas, and I'm very proud that when I served in Congress, I voted against NAFTA. But we also have to make sure not just that taxes are kept low here, and he talks about lower taxes, but in fact he has repeatedly raised taxes, sales tax, the cigarette tax, property tax is $1 billion. My record on taxes is very clear. As a member of Congress, I never once voted to raise any tax. I voted against any piece of legislation that had a new tax or a tax increase in it. My approach to economic growth is one that will create this economic climate that sets us apart from our neighboring states and from other places across the country, but also take advantage of the workforce that we have here that is so well experienced in manufacturing. And when we do that, we will have job growth in Indiana.
Mr. Horning, 45-second rebuttal.
Well, I guess I got it kind of easy here. They have to convince you that they know best about what to do with jobs, and I have to convince you that they don't. But other than just the things that I had already said about politicians and entrusting them with this burden, it is a burden for them as well as it is for any of us to decide what's best for us in terms of engineering versus service businesses. I think they've made some bad choices. But I really want to emphasize that I don't think any of us up here have any business making decisions about business when that is not our business. The business of government is a very simple thing in my way of looking at it, and that is just to protect whatever it is that you have by way of rights and property and life from those who would take it away from you. That's really it. I don't want to do anything else, and so I don't need to convince you of my expertise.
Thank you. Mr. Daniels?
Is this the rebuttal I didn't get on the previous question, Dan?
Yeah.
I might be mistaken, but I think I missed the turn. Is that possible?
If I missed that, Governor, I apologize. Okay.
Am I right? Okay. Let me just use that if I'm correct about that. Ms. Thompson, so many falsehoods, so little time. Let me just start.
Governor, if I could interrupt for just a second, my earphone tells me that you are correct, and I did cheat you out of a rebuttal. We're going to give you some extra time here. Go ahead.
I'll try to stay within it. No, we balanced the budget of the state without raising taxes. The tightest budget in 55 years. This is a matter, there's no debate about this. It's absolutely true. And the sales tax was offset by $1.72 of tax reduction. It's the biggest tax cut, as a matter of fact, in Indiana state history. Every penny of the sales tax went back to property tax payers, plus part of the surplus that we had accumulated. Every penny of the cigarette tax went straight to providing health insurance, which I know Ms. Thompson sincerely agrees we ought to do, and 3/4 of her fellow party members in both houses voted to support. So Indiana taxes are lower today, and they're headed down further with the property tax as it becomes fully into effect. And I think we can all agree that we're after the best economic climate possible. I'm glad that we all three agree that that involves lower taxes. Let's talk about how to achieve that or to continue achieving that.
Thank you. Ms. Long Thompson?
Yes, well, again, I think the facts speak for themselves. The governor, in 3 of his State of the State addresses, has asked for tax increases, tried to get an increase in the income tax, but the legislature stopped him. And I guess we probably shouldn't be surprised because, as George Bush's budget director, Governor Daniels is the architect of the largest deficit in the history of the world. I think Indiana needs better leadership, and that's why I'm running for governor.
Please, just a reminder, this takes away from the candidate's time to speak. With our 4th question, we're going to turn to Mr. Daniels again. And Kurt Weiss, an environmental scientist, is concerned about the city in which he lives, Gary. He notes that Gary is facing huge budget deficits as a result of the recently adopted property tax caps. Mr. Weiss goes on, while no one wants high taxes, it's obvious that Gary has been on the decline for over the past 2 decades in terms of poverty, crime, gangs, and abandoned buildings. And lately, it has become obvious that the severity of these problems has increased beyond the control of our mayor and city council. Mr. Weiss asks, what can the governor do to spur the redevelopment and rejuvenation of this once great city, which has fallen on such unprecedented hard times?
Relief for the city of Gary must start in Gary itself. Let's start by taking this problem apart just a little bit. First of all, the property tax caps aren't in effect yet. They have nothing to do with Gary's current budget problem. And those problems are not new anyway. They've been there for many, many years. They are the product of years and years and years of overspending, and I'm sorry to say it, corruption. And in places like Gary, I believe earnestly that the state ought to do all it can to help, but there must be an element of self-help too. I do not believe that the problems of Gary or any of our other urban areas, by the way, will be solved by higher taxes. Higher property taxes were killing some of these cities, driving people out to suburbs and beyond. The best way that I can think of to bring people back is to make housing more affordable, make doing business in places like this more affordable, and that's going to have to mean less government at the local level, and certainly honest government. You know, I have made now 62 trips to Lake County. I do this very sincerely. I clearly don't do it, obviously, because this is the friendliest territory in Indiana politically. I do it because I honestly believe that Indiana will not be the great state it can be until the northwest corner and the million people who live here are fully brought into the family of this state, and that this whole area, including Gary, perhaps our most distressed community, begin to succeed again.
Ms. Long Thompson.
Well, I do believe, and I at one time lived in Northwest Indiana when I taught at Valparaiso University, and I do believe there are things that the state can do to work with not just local government, but with the local business sector. And when Governor Daniels talks about how he hasn't cut funds here and so forth, the reality is that when he leased the toll road for 75 years, which amounts to a sale of the toll road for all practical purposes, that toll road has been a very important part of the economy here in Northwest Indiana, but Northwest Indiana is only getting 5% of the lease money from that contract. That's wrong. But it's also wrong to say that the state can't be helpful. And I believe the way that we're going to grow the economy here is to form partnerships, not just between state and local government, but between government and the business sector, and strategically work toward realistic goals, goals that will include job creation. And to do that's going to require reform of our tax structure. But we're also going to work on education and work to get the high school graduation rate up here in Lake County and in the Gary schools, and also work to bring health insurance costs down. I believe the solution is to work together with a real plan and make the economy start to grow, create the engines that are necessary, and as governor, I look forward to working with this community to make that happen.
Mr. Horning, the City of Gary.
Well, actually, Governor Daniels agreed with me once. I'm going to agree with you, too. The City of Gary is a good example of what happens when you have a single party entrenched for so many years and the corruption that grows out of that. I would extend that to say that when you have two parties that have been entrenched for 100 years, we have a serious problem when we believe that we have to keep doing what we've been doing and expect different results. I think what we need to do is take a look at and see exactly how entrenched the political powers have become in Gary and extricate ourselves as politicians from that problem. I think the people of Gary are no less entrepreneurial and wise and able to work than anyone else in the state. And the crime rates and the problems that we've seen in several cities in all across the country where you've had a single party or you've had an increased dependency on politics, I think the problem really is that these people don't feel like they're fully bought into the culture. They can't own things because of things like property tax. You look to see how many people are losing their homes in areas like that to foreclosure and debt. What we need to do is give these people the tools to get back on their feet and to build for themselves what they built 100 years ago. It worked before, it'll work again, it works better than anything else ever tried, and that thing is freedom.
Mr. Daniels, 45-second rebuttal.
Well, Gary and the toll road don't have that much to do with each other, but since it comes up, let me just correct a few of the falsehoods we just heard. The toll road deal generated 30 times more for Indiana than the toll road did under 50 years of political management, and much of that wound up in northwest Indiana. 5 times more for Lake County than it got in 50 years, 40 times more for LaPorte County as another example. The RDA, Regional Development Authority, which I supported, was funded with proceeds from the toll road. It's the biggest infusion of money into northwest Indiana that I know of in our history. So many more things to correct if time permits, but just for one, The toll road deal was a spectacular business success, and it paid off more than anywhere for the citizens of the Northwest.
Thompson?
Well, to quote Governor Daniels' former boss, George Bush, fuzzy math. But the reality is there is a great deal of potential for economic growth and development here. But it's not going to happen by taking resources away from the local community and centralizing them in Indianapolis. And as I stated earlier, as governor, I look forward to working with the residents and the public officials and the business community of Lake County, including Gary, and revitalizing this economy here in Northwest Indiana.
Mr. Horning.
Well, I agree with a couple of things that both of them said here about, in so much as they both agree in certain instances where government needs to get out of the way, whether it's based in Indianapolis or whether it's based in Gary. The fact is that government has been their biggest problem, and what we need to do is make sure that we're no longer the biggest problem.
Our fifth question, we'll start with Ms. Long Thompson. Elaine Averill, a homemaker who lives in Knox, believes that having 2 time zones in Indiana is confusing and bad for business. She asked, will you try to put all of Indiana in the same time zone?
Well, I think here's another example of maybe a problem with leadership in the governor's office. And I think when Governor Daniels was running for governor, he made some commitments or some statements about what he thought would work, and then we had sort of this random assignment of time zone to various counties, and it simply is not working. We have families who have children going to school in the same school system that crosses county lines, and their children are going to school in different time zones. There are 2 issues here. One is the time zone, and the other is daylight savings time. And I think the appropriate way to proceed, and I've been talking about this out across the state as I've been campaigning, is that we will hold a statewide referendum on those 2 issues, and from there we can make the right decision that works for commerce in Indiana, as well as a decision that works for our families.
Mr. Horning.
Actually, it's the federal Constitution that gives government the right to set the standard of weight and measures. And I proposed a long time ago that Congress take that responsibility seriously and take a look at things like SAE metric measures and ISO time. I've been speaking out against daylight saving time for many, many years, and I guess I have to say, told you so. I mean, it didn't solve anything that people thought it was going to solve, and it's created more nightmares. You know, we might as well just make another 15-minute adjustment to keep us all on time. This is nuts. Who are we fooling? Leave our clocks alone. But I think that the solution to this is to allow, you know, the constitutions to do what they're supposed to do and put things in their proper place. We are in the central time zone. The whole state is. The federal guys could see that if they look at a map. And what we should do is just allow them to set the standard of weight and measures for the whole country so that it makes some sense. And then we don't have to worry about this business of daylight saving time, because if you want to do something in a different hour, do it at a different hour, but leave your clock alone. We're not changing the placement of the sun. This is just a lot of silliness. And by the way, Benjamin Franklin was joking when he proposed this.
Mr. Daniels, 2 time zones.
Now, this was a simple commitment. By the way, a position shared by former Governor Kernan, former Governor O'Bannon, former Governor Bayh. It was difficult for business. Every business group agreed. It was an impediment to have really, if you think 2 time zones is tough, how did you like 3? That's what we had, with more than half the state moving back and forth twice a year. I don't find fault with anybody who disagrees about it, but I did think it was important to keep that commitment. And I do believe it is much simpler now that the whole rest of the world, this is a global economy we're in. And I didn't mind the jokes, but I did mind the lost dollars, missed shipments, missed conferences, and all the rest that went hundreds of times a day with people elsewhere not knowing what time is in Indiana this month. The folks here in the Northwest have never had this problem. Everybody knows you're always on Chicago time, you're always an hour behind New York. Much of the rest of the state was constantly ping-ponging back and forth. But honest people can differ about it, and I do understand that. Let me just go back to one thing. Mrs. Thompson misunderstands something pretty badly about cutting property taxes. The money doesn't go to Indianapolis. It stays in the pockets of the property taxpayers of Lake County and elsewhere. That's where I think it belongs, especially in difficult economic times. One of the most important things we could do was leave more money with them. And your preference for taking it away, perhaps in greater amounts, and giving it to government local or state. I'm sorry, I just disagree.
Ms. Long Thompson, 45-second rebuttal.
Well, and let me just say that with the tax structure reforms that Governor Daniels has put into place, he has taken resources away from local communities, and that's exactly what I was stating, and that is exactly what's taking place, which is why we see a number of local governments unable to fund programs that are critical to their security in their respective communities. And with regard to the time zone, clearly it's no more clear today what time zone a particular city or town is in because of the mass confusion from the random assignment of time zone to counties. As governor, I'll fix it.
Mr. Horning.
I think we need to look at how this really works in reality. When you've got people bickering over something, it's often a good idea to bring in a referee. That's really, in this case, what the federal government is supposed to do. That's why it's in the federal Constitution for them to assign standards of weights and measures. That's the way it's supposed to work. I don't fault either one of these candidates for the way they look at this property tax or the daylight saving time issue, because frankly, voters have been the ones who have made the decisions on this. We've been crying in political ears saying, you solve it, when we were actually looking at the wrong layer of government. I would insist that this is something we push back to the federal government and say, you guys get this straight, do it correctly, because that's what the Constitution says, and it would work.
Mr. Daniels?
Nothing to add.
Very good. With our sixth question, we'll begin with Mr. Horning. Stephen J. Stalcup is a retiree who lives in Greenwood. He notes that a better educated workforce is the key to the economic future of the state. However, escalating cost of an education at our state universities has put higher education beyond the reach of most middle-income students. How will you address this problem and ensure that access to higher education for all Hoosiers, that all Hoosiers is available to all Hoosiers regardless of their funding, and also to ensure that this funding is equal to how we fund our athletic programs at these state schools?
Oh my, that's a good question. If you read the Indiana Constitution, the funding for what they call in the Constitution common schools is very clear, and we're not doing that. Actually, what a common school is also very clear. It was an 1840s Horace Mann idea that we have not been keeping true to. It's supposed to be an equal ladder of opportunity for all kids, no matter what their economic background is. So there shouldn't be rich schools in rich areas and poor schools in poor areas. It should be funded by the state, not the local areas. And because we've gotten this all screwed up, and because we handed it over to a teachers union that is for teachers and not for students, we have gotten ourselves into this pickle where we have dumbed down primary education to the point where a college degree is now what really ought to be a high school education. When you think about how many years a kid spends in college, all of us up here spend a lot of years in college. But you look at people like Bill Gates and the CEOs of a lot of corporations, they bailed out and started doing business and got rich. We got to get ourselves straight on what this is really all about. Are we going to institutionalize our kids in a union shop? Or are we going to start getting serious about education and make sure that it works by the time they get out of high school? This idea that everybody's got to go to college and we have to pay for it is not only dysfunctional, it's nonsense. We have to do a better job at these kids at an earlier age so that when they decide to go to college, it's because they want to be a specialist, they want to be a doctor, they want to be something productive other than a politician, of course. And I think that it's real important to say that, the primary schools are really where the government should be paying its attention.
Thank you. Mr. Daniels, escalating costs of education at our state universities.
Yeah. Well, Andrew, of course, we are paying a lot of attention to that. That's why we raised dramatically the number of kids in full-day kindergarten. That's why the proposals for more dollars in the classrooms now. But the question of college affordability is an excellent one, and Indiana's got a long way to go. This could be what holds us back from the great economic future that every other indicator points to. We have some of the lowest levels of college attainment anywhere in America. And we have to go at it right now. I've proposed that we use the future growth and lottery proceeds to guarantee to every Indiana high school graduate 2 years at Ivy Tech or that equivalent tuition at any other Indiana school. We have to get through to our young people and their parents, frankly, with the point that you will not likely hold a family supporting job in the economy of the future without some education beyond high school. And we simply have to make sure that dream is born in every Indiana house, and we have to make it a certainty that they can afford college. And hopefully many of them will catch fire and go well beyond that. When the lottery was pitched to Hoosiers initially, Ask any in any community you visit, people remember that it was supposed to do something for education. I think it's time, at least in part, to redeem that pledge and starting with making the dream of college real and affordable for literally every Indiana student.
Ms. Long Thompson.
Yes. Well, Governor Daniels has been governor for almost 4 years, and during that time period, college education has become less affordable for many Hoosier families, and that's causing problems for young people who want to go on and get a degree, from an undergraduate degree, or go on for graduate school. I'm the first in my family to go to college, and I know from my firsthand experience that I have opportunities today that I would never have had I not had that opportunity to use a National Defense student loan and a scholarship to go to Valparaiso University and then on to graduate school. Now, Governor Daniels talks about how he wants to privatize the lottery and use some of the proceeds for college education. The reality is he wants to privatize the lottery. And to make it more palatable, he's saying we'll use some of the money for college education. And those of us who remember when the lottery was created, it was never created to fund education in Indiana, except for maybe some special kinds of programs, because it was never considered to be a consistent source of funding. I have a plan that will expand the 21st Century Scholars Program, which I think is an incredible program begun by Senator Evan Bayh when he was governor. But also, we need to grow our economy here in Indiana so that we have a stronger economic base to fund public education, including our public universities, and that's why I'm running for governor.
Mr. Horning, 45-second rebuttal.
45 seconds to rebut all of that. I guess I have to say that, given the fact that we have gone down this road of trusting politicians with more and more, and given the fact that you can see very plainly that schools are almost like farm teams for the pros now, where we spend a lot of money on sports, and not a lot of that makes it into the classroom. And since 1959, when we started deconstructing the common school system and started making bigger and bigger schools, fewer schools that are farther away from kids' homes and farther away from parents, where we have to use buses and big cafeterias, our education system isn't about education anymore. It's babysitting and it's sports. And we have to get serious about whether we're going to keep it going in this direction or whether we're going to focus on education, which means maybe paying for books.
Well, it would be helpful if Ms. Thompson would stop misstating everything that I have proposed. Now, I very clearly said that I'm simply suggesting we use the future growth in lottery revenue, not all of it, and it doesn't matter to me whether we do this through a private auction. If that raises more money, we can help more students, then that's what I'm for. Otherwise, we can bond against it. Really, I would also suggest politely, you ought to stop treating private as a dirty word. It is the private sector in which most Hoosiers work and where the bills of this state get paid. And, businesses are listening. When we express a hostility to the private sector, we run the risk of undoing an awful lot of goodwill we have done that is bringing thousands of jobs to Indiana right now.
Ms. Long Thompson.
Well, I grew up in a family business, and my husband and I are business people, and we feel very strongly that were it not for entrepreneurship, we would have a long way to go in growing our economy here in Indiana. That spirit of entrepreneurship is what moves our economy forward. But the reality is Governor Daniels has been privatizing and selling off assets, and he wants to do the same thing with the lottery. And to make that more palatable, he has said we would use some of that money for education. But the real problem with his administration is the economy. And we are losing too many jobs. In fact, we are losing jobs faster here in Indiana than in any other state. I am running for governor to grow this economy so that we will have the resources we need for our infrastructure and for education.
Thank you. Due to time constraints, we will now limit initial responses to 1 minute and rebuttal responses to 30 seconds. And we're going to begin this time with Mr. Daniels. Ruth Large from Greensburg works in finance. She's concerned about education. She wants to know if there has been any discussion about doing away with book rental fees. Ms. Large points to a 2005 report by the state's Education Commission, which noted that 41 states and the District of Columbia provide free textbooks for their students. Ms. Large asks, why is Indiana still charging for textbooks, especially since the state has a surplus?
I'm with Ruth. And it's one of the things I think we will fix when we raise from 61 cents of the education dollar to something higher the percentage of education spending that reaches the classroom. Less expensive or free textbooks ought to be one of the first things that happens, along with more teachers and better paid teachers. You know, every 1% improvement in that number is over $100 million. It's a huge opportunity. If we could bring some efficiency to our construction, which has begun to happen, to procurement, and to the overhead, with which I'm sorry to say Indiana education is replete. So I think she's on to something here. I absolutely agree that particularly for the low and middle income families, it's just not conscionable to charge as we do today. Let me just say, with regard to so many of the things that Mrs. Thompson is saying, you know, we don't have to wonder where these policies of hers would lead us. They're there in all our neighboring states. And they were here in Indiana. That's how we arrived 3 years ago at a bankrupt state with a dysfunctional government and an economy that no one at that time was marking off as attractive.
Ms. Long Thompson, 60 seconds.
Making education affordable, including the affordability of textbooks, that will always be a priority for me. I am an educator and know that education has made all the difference in the world in my life. But there are problems with Governor Daniels' education policies, reflected by the fact that we have a high school dropout rate of about 32%. And we also have too many of our young people not going on to college. And we have too many young people who haven't learned to read. And my education policy will make sure that every child has the opportunity to learn to read. We will give students flexibility to help them to graduate from high school, and we will work to make education, higher education, affordable. The fact of the matter is, with lowered SAT scores, with so many of our kids not finishing high school, we have a whole host of issues that have to be addressed with education policy. But to make it work, we have to grow the economy, and that's not happening under Daniels' leadership.
Thank you. Mr. Horning?
Well, I think that both the candidates in one way or another kind of touched on the problem when they were saying like lowering test scores, and we have lots of problems that we didn't used to have. And I think that that's kind of a telling statement when you think about how our founders were so right on so many issues and we can't seem to get it through our heads that we're heading in the wrong direction. The Constitution is a good contract. It would work. I say we do it. And I guess I've already said about textbooks, which was the original question, but just as a general note, I have to say I've said some pretty angry things about education. I'm pretty passionate about it, but you guys haven't attacked me on it yet, and I'm kind of thinking that you can gang up on me and maybe diffuse some of the tension between you two.
Mr. Daniels, 30-second rebuttal.
Well, Andrew, I'm not in the business of attacking anybody. And, you know, our campaigns in Indiana, the recent ones anyway, we've largely been spared from that sort of negative campaigning, and I'm really hoping that it will happen the balance of this year too. I think education, at least is one topic I think all three of us have agreed about. We're not nearly where we need to be. It didn't start 3 years ago. These problems have been there for decades, and I said in answer to the very first question, it's the biggest issue we have to work on in the next 4.
Thank you. Ms. Long Thompson?
Well, this is a very important race for Indiana. Our economy has eroded in the last 4 years. We have a high school dropout rate that is unacceptable. And I think it's very important to talk about the real record of the current governor. And that's not negative campaigning unless his policies are not working and unless they're negative. And I think the facts speak for themselves. We are losing jobs faster than any other state in the union. Hoosiers make about 88 cents on the dollar relative to the rest of the country. We can do better.
And Mr. Horning?
I'm not much of a rebuttal on any of that. I think that it's just important to take a look at what we're doing to our kids. This is about children after all. It's not about the teachers. It's not about our babysitting. And I think that we've really kind of lost touch on that sometimes, and we've also lost touch with the fact that there are laws that control what politicians do, and they're built into the Constitution. And I wish all of you would read it and then hold us accountable to it.
Each candidate will now be invited to make a closing statement. Each statement will be 2 minutes in length, and we will begin with Mr. Daniels.
I want to thank again the Commission and all those who participated tonight. I want to especially thank you for holding this first debate in Northwest Indiana. Too often forgotten, too often not considered fully a part of the Indiana family. I've mentioned more than once how essential I think it is that change and many things we have done to put dollars and certainly our personal attention to that task. I want to thank my two opponents. They are both sincere and passionate advocates of points of view different than mine, both of which, frankly, look backwards. Mrs. Thompson's to the exact policies that put Indiana in the fix we found it in 3.5 years ago. Andrews, I think, even further back than that. I respect their points of view, but I think it's very important to contest them vigorously. 3.5 years ago, Indiana was flat broke fiscally. Today, we have the AAA credit rating for the first time in state history. Along the way, we balanced the budget without raising taxes, paid back the schools and local governments, and rebuilt the rainy day funds. 3 years ago, Indiana state government was dysfunctional. Today, agencies like the Bureau of Motor Vehicles and Child Protection are winning national awards. A long way to go in this area, but Governing Magazine found Indiana the most improved state government in America. And CNBC just found us the most improved economy in America. They followed CEO Magazine and Forbes Magazine and ratings of every description. We can all agree we have a long way to go economically, but it's simply false to say that nothing is different, that Indiana is not moving aggressively forward as an attractive place for jobs, and the record number of jobs coming here tells that story. I've had a great opportunity the last 5 years. I've traveled this state as few people have ever done it. I've been to places that my fellow candidates, in many cases, have never heard of and will never see. No one has to tell me. I've seen face-to-face the very difficult problems we still face. It's very personal to me. But the Indiana these days aims higher, expects more. Number one in the Midwest is not good enough. We have made a good start on the great state we intend to leave to our kids.
Now a closing statement from Ms. Long Thompson.
I thank the Debate Commission for hosting this debate, and I thank Governor Daniels and Andrew Horning for participating and also for running. I think public service is one of the highest callings, but I'm running for governor because Indiana needs leadership that will take us in a new direction in growing the economy. And when Governor Daniels in his TV ads and here this evening talks about how much better Indiana is doing than other states, I think he needs a reality check. The fact is, we, as I have said repeatedly tonight, we are losing jobs faster than any other state in the union. Hoosiers make 88 cents on the dollar relative to the rest of the country. And as I've traveled this state, and it is a beautiful state with tremendous assets, but as I've traveled this state and I've talked with families that have lost jobs, and I've talked with families that are concerned about how they're going to pay their energy bills this winter, and I talk to families who don't know how they can afford gasoline, and we have a governor who has raised the state sales tax, and that makes gasoline higher in Indiana. It's now on average $4.17 a gallon. We have a governor who is not addressing the real issues of the economy, and my approach is frankly a very new approach, and I think it probably comes from the fact that I was very privileged to study at Indiana University at the Kelley School, where I earned an MBA and a PhD in business. And I know that economic growth and development occurs because you create an economic climate that works. It's not a program. Governor Daniels has created lots of programs, and all you have to do is go on the website of the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, and you'll see program after program that nobody even applies for because the programs don't work. I'm running for governor to reform our tax structure, to bring health and insurance costs down by making pooling a real and viable option, get our high school graduation rate up, and I think the choice is clear. 4 more years of moving backward, losing jobs, or real leadership that will create new jobs and stimulate economic growth for our children and our grandchildren.
And finally, a closing statement from Mr. Horning.
First of all, yeah, I do have my head stuck a couple hundred years ago, but let me tell you why that is. Because every time we think we can move beyond it, we end up going back before Hammurabi. That's why. You know, the thing that we have to understand is that there is nothing new about government getting bigger and bigger and politicians taking more and more control of our lives. That's not new, that's ancient. It just so happens I'm the only guy up here who's made my living in high technology. I've been in the medical electronics industry for like 30 some odd years now, and that's not politics. I've been fighting politics all those years. In fact, I guess I have to say, just as a categorical statement, who I am. I live in a little town called Freedom, Indiana. It's one of those places I know you know about, Governor Daniels, and thank you for being down there, and I know you know about it too. But not very many people know what life is like down in the on dirt roads in the political circles. These people have hobnobbed in ways that I never could approach. I've lived like a regular life. I've had bad years. I've had my own business. I'm trying to raise a family on a little farm. We've got a goat. You know, we have some of the same problems everybody else does. But it's not just the goat. You know, goat is a problem, but the biggest problem we have, the biggest problem I have always had is politicians. These guys know where I live and they won't leave me alone. The fact is, you guys who have to pay taxes on your house don't own your house. I've been advocating the elimination of property tax for 10 years. Now people are starting to think that's not such a bad idea. And I've been talking about the Constitution well before it was talked about by people like Ron Paul or others, because it is a very good idea. There is nothing, in fact, better than the constitutions for which generations of Americans have fought and died to protect. This is not an ancient thing. This is a good thing. It is the best thing that human beings have ever done, in fact. This was a nation that proved that liberty works, and that is a precious thing. This is what's on the ballot, guys. It's not about who's got the best wisdom. In fact, I got to say these guys are pretty smart. They have educations that I can't really match in terms of public policy, but what I do know is that it doesn't work.
Thank you. I might point out, Mr. Horning, that there's a lot of Chicago Cub fans in the audience, and they've had issues with goats as well. Mitch Daniels, Jill Long Thompson, and Andy Horning, thank you for your participation in this evening's debate. Ms. Long Thompson, you noted that it's not an easy thing to run for public office, and I think it's important that we all recognize the courage that it takes to step forward into public and make this kind of commitment that each of you has made. Thank you. We remind Hoosier citizens that the deadline for registering to vote is Monday, October 6th, 29 days prior to this year's general election, which will take place on Tuesday, November 4th. The second of 3 gubernatorial debates to be on Tuesday, September 23rd. Voters will ask questions themselves in a town hall format, a somewhat different format than this debate. A third debate will be held in Bloomington, Indiana on Tuesday, October 14th. I want to take a moment to thank the League of Women Voters for their assistance in this evening's debate. Thank you, folks. And we want to thank the Times of Northwest Indiana and Lakeshore Public Television for their production assistance, and the Star Plaza Theater and Dean White, who made the theater available to the Indiana State Commission. Good night. Thank you.